attention to this now. Over the last couple of weeks, the city of Johannesburg has had low pressure water supply, and this is in some parts of the city, and some areas absolutely no water at all. The Johannesburg mayor, Thapelo Ahmad, has blamed rainwater and the issue of vandalism of water infrastructure for the water woes. Well, Ahmad says they're looking for a solution to be independent from rainwater. We'll find out exactly what that entails. We'll speak now to the mayor himself, executive mayor of Johannesburg, Thapelo Ahmad, and sitting alongside him is Johannesburg Water's managing director, Njabeni Mokwebo. Gentlemen, to both of you, thank you very much for your time and good morning. Thank you for joining us here. Mr. Mayor, let me start with you. How many water tankers are out there roaming the streets of Johannesburg today?
It's 28. Good morning, Date Nkambi, yes, and the viewers at home. It's 28 water tankers roaming in the streets of Johannesburg. It's not only the water tanks, it's also stationary or static tanks that are placed in various areas. But however, in terms of JoJo tanks, which are static, there's an element of vandalism and there's an element of theft because they are being stolen away when they are empty. So what we did is to bring or deploy the roving water tanks that are moving the areas. And when we find that in some areas that, because the disruption, it's just a disruption. It doesn't mean that entirely the city of Johannesburg doesn't have water. It's a water outage. It's just a disruption. It goes and it comes. So when it comes into certain areas, then we deploy the very same roving tanks into areas that are highly affected so that we can bring capacity into those areas.
Yeah. I know you've blamed rainwater. We're going to get into those nitty-gritties in a moment. Let's bring in Mr. Mokwebo here. Technical expertise. I want to start with those static tanks. The mayor talks about them being vandalized, and I'm not sure, can't remember what the other issue is, but theft. Yes. My biggest worry, though, is that, yes, I suppose it's a good idea for you to go and plunk a JoJo tank outside a particular facility, but is there someone looking after it overnight? Because some people with ill intentions can come and just contaminate that water, and that becomes unsafe for drinking.
Thanks, Collie, and good morning to you and to viewers out there. Look, we really rely on community as well. We work very closely with communities wherever we're deploying the alternative water, which is in the form of water tanks as well as the stationary tanks. Yes, some of them, we find them, we've placed them within the premises, especially if we are supplying at the old age home and so on. But there are those that we place them on the street itself. And what we do is more to rely on the community, of course, and the awareness that we run to make sure that nothing happens on those tanks.
That can't be a safety measure, Mr. Mokwebo, by any stretch of the imagination. It's a JoJo tank that is just placed on a pavement. Any passerby, as I say, can simply just, to spite the community, drop something in there and everybody is sick. That can't be safe.
Yes, we do understand the concern that we are raising, Toli. But of course, there are many awareness that we run on the community so that if there's anything that is suspected can be raised with us. And we believe that up to so far, those measures have worked. Where we have made those awareness to the community so that we work together.
Well, we cross fingers that no such thing does happen. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. You're
blaming rainwater for these water disruptions. Explain why.
Look, we are not playing a blame game. What we are doing is that there's a lack of communications from the rainwater. We are not blaming it entirely. What we are requesting from the rainwater is to have a coordinated approach on how do they communicate. Because remember, the residents do not know who's the rainwater. They are our service provider as the city. We buy water from them. But if there's an issue, like yesterday we had a press briefing, they were supposed to have been there. Because ours is to also respect the intergovernmental relations so that we have a coordinated approach in serving our residents. What differs in context is that Mr. Mokwebo is here with me. So on local government, they interact with politicians on a day-to-day basis. The oversight is there on a day-to-day basis. But on a national level, the contents are different in terms of how, when, and how do they do the oversight. It's not a blame game. We are saying we want to work together. We want to resolve the issue, because as the city of Johannesburg, the crisis is not mainly with us, but what we are pleading with Rainwater is that let's get together and find a way to communicate with the residents so that we disseminate an adequate information out there, so that councillors that are mainly in the opposition shouldn't play politics to coerce people and play cheap politics. I'll tell you why I'm saying this. I'll explain. This is a plight, right? And it's a serious plight, and it's a human rights issue. So councillors would be with me on site, you know, in the absence of the communities. Immediately when I leave, they go on Twitter, they create videos, and then they talk badly, they talk ill about the executive mayor who doesn't care about the people, and the executive mayor who doesn't have a solution. And I can assure you that in those particular areas, they do not even have mass disruption of water. It's only a day or two, and Joburg Water is working tirelessly on the ground to ensure that there's adequate water that is provided or pumped into their taps.
Let me tease out the elements that you say Rainwater cannot be blamed for alone. So where do you, as the city, fall short?
Where do we fall short is that we just need to have a communication watertight between us and Rainwater, so that, remember, there's an issue of confidence from the residents, right? The residents would say, no, you are giving us parallel communications and we're not sure who's talking the truth between you and Rainwater. So we need to have a watertight or coordinated approach on how do we disseminate the information to the residents. For argument's sake, let's say, for an example, right, let's say we take a blame as Joburg Water. The residents also has to play a part. I've never seen in a day where a resident who's ill, who goes to the doctor and they tell the doctor what to do, right? Because these are professionals. If we bring the technicians on site, these are professionals. They need to be equally respected, so that when they disseminate the information, it also has to be trusted in as much as we trust our medical practitioners.
Mr. Mkwebo, surely this goes deeper than just a mere lack of communication. That's important indeed for us as residents to be able to plan our lives better in the midst of this crisis. But surely it's not just communications. How about infrastructure in Johannesburg? How would you describe it?
Yes, we do invest in water infrastructure continuously in Johannesburg. If I can share with you some numbers, on annual basis, the city invests about R1 billion on water infrastructure, water service rather infrastructure, because it includes also the sewer infrastructure. Yes, it's not enough. We need to do much more, and there are many plans that we have in place where we are looking at various alternatives or making sure that we can be able to mobilize the required capital that can be able to help us to do various projects that we want to do across the city. But coming back to this specific one, Koli, because I think it will be very important that I bring some context to say what are we dealing with here. The city itself, indeed, there are two specific areas mainly that have been affected mainly in the past 10 weeks. And in the past 10 weeks, one area was affected more than the other. This is the area around just west, the west side of the inner city. This is around Brixton, Crosby, and so on. And the other one that was affected is around Crown Gardens in the south of Johannesburg. And if you look at this, and this is the information that we were sharing yesterday in our media briefing, that if you look at the root cause of this interruption that has happened, mainly is the frequent power failure that has happened at rainwater plants. And those, because of those frequent power failure that has happened, of course, plus the two vandalisms that happened, the last one which happened on Tuesday. Those are the issues that made the entire system, not only our system, also from our back supply rainwater, finding itself in terms of the reservoir at low level to empty some of the reservoirs, simply because they could not pump the required volume continuously. And if you don't pump your required volume continuously, your reservoir levels drops. And once it drops, then you find that you can't be able to supply water, especially in high-lying area. Yeah. So that's what exactly happened around this particular issue.
So in the main, if we factor everything,
Yes.
people of Johannesburg can safely blame Rand Water's pumping system, which is then affected by, I suppose, power supply, and that's why they have not been receiving water. Is that the long and short of it?
It's two things, the long and short of it. Two, one, the frequent power failures happen in the main in Vernagen, where they've got their plants. Secondly, is the two vandalism that has happened. One happened on Tuesday in Midval, and another one happened about 2 weeks back in Ekurhuleni. You know, those are the main issues that affected the water supply in the area, in these two parts of area of Johannesburg.
Have they told you, as Joburg Water, how they are planning to circumvent or at least deal with the power supply issue? Because that seems to be standing out based on this conversation that we're having.
Indeed. They have shared with us the work that they're doing behind the scene. As you may be aware, that the power supply, of course, they rely on other entities that helps them with power, including the local authority from Vernagen. So there are various engagements that's happening between Rand Water and Mfuleni around the issue of the power supply at their plant.
Yeah.
And we are expecting to be really getting feedback from them shortly around what the two entities are going to finalize in terms of making sure that the power supply is stable to their plant.
Mr. Mayor, yesterday you spoke about a permanent solution to this crisis, and that's bringing in independent power producers. That's not something we're hearing for the first time. The previous mayor before you would have started that initiative. Where are you with those plans?
Look, in the main commando system in our facility, we've spoken to the city power not to do the load shedding in that system. So it is effective in that commando system where day in, day out, whenever there's a load shedding in the surrounding area, city power is able to stabilize the water supply in that area. So we need to also look at what other capacities and other alternative energies that we can bring in place.
Let me just come in quickly. When you say you have spoken to
The city
power
correct,
to stabilize, what does that mean? Does that mean that you've said to them, exempt that commando system from load shedding? Is that in essence
it's an exemption because the hospitals and that are around the area, they also dependent into that commando system. So we had to bypass the process and say there's an exemption here. Let us supply the hospitals because we can't allow the hospitals to go a day without water. Yeah, it would be detrimental to the health of the people who are in those hospitals.
But what about city power, their communications with Eskom, who is the main culprit behind load shedding? Are they in sync about that messaging, that this area ought to be exempted?
They are in sync to a certain degree. Remember, we are talking about the livelihood of people. We understand that water is also part of that livelihood and human rights, but we are pleading with the community to sacrifice for a certain period of time until we get all the processes in place so that we can ensure that this situation is rescued permanently.
Yeah. Mr. Mkwebo, on a scale of 1 to 10, I want to go back to the issue of infrastructure. It's no secret that water infrastructure is neglected in this country. I'm not just talking about Johannesburg alone. What is the real state of water infrastructure in Johannesburg? On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put it?
Maybe let me answer this way, Collie. Indeed, the water infrastructure in Johannesburg needs attention. There's no doubt about it.
How much attention?
In the sense that if you look at the backlog that stands currently, I mean, these numbers are on record. We put them in our annual report and so on. We have a backlog of about 24 billion in terms of investment that's required. And if you look at in the next 10 years what we need to do, we need to be investing about 29 billion in terms of renewing our assets that we have across the city. So hence I say, indeed, it needs attention, and there are plans that we're working to make sure that we do increase the investment in the water infrastructure within the city.
A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with the DG at Water and Sanitation, and we were talking water specifically. He seemed to, I'm not going to use the word blame, but you could tell from his voice that, of course, he's going to shield a sphere of government, a fellow sphere of government, but municipalities are to blame for what we residents are experiencing when it comes to water infrastructure. What is it that you are doing or that you are not doing but you're supposed to be doing? Let's put aside the issue of money. I hear you, 24 billion rand backlog that you say you need in order for you to properly service water infrastructure. But what other elements are you falling short?
I won't say there are other elements that we are falling short, because if we, as an entity or as a city, if we look at in terms of skills, we have skills in the organization, we have the necessary engineers and other type of skills that are required really to make sure that we provide the service that is required by the community. The main issue, as things stand, around the water supply in the city, but not necessarily referring to the current incident, of course looking at the long term, is the issue of how do we increase the investment in water infrastructure. That's the main thing. And as I said, there are various issues that we're working on, which involves also looking at the opportunity where we can be able to bring private sector around certain aspects that we believe private sector can be able to bring capital.
I'll tell you why I'm going to press you a little bit on this. Water experts, such as Professor Anthony Turton, they are of the firm view that it's simply the failure to manage the system. And I suppose that includes maintenance, where we really are in South Africa. That's the biggest issue. Do you agree with him or not, that it is a failure to manage these water systems? We have water. Yes, it's not an infinite resource, but we do have it, and we have it in huge amounts. I mean, just look at the amount of rainfall we have received. But if you are not managing it as you should, that's the problem. Perhaps the problem is a skill set as well. How are you doing on that score?
The skill set, I won't really agree on the part of skill set, especially in Johannesburg, and I'll explain to you why. In terms of management, in terms of management of water, of infrastructure, the key issues that we lack, and this is not only Johannesburg, across the country, in the main, is the issue around renewal of assets. Because that goes as part of management of water systems. Because these pipes that we put on the ground, the plants that we have, those plants, they're able to run up to a certain point. You need to make sure that you renew them according to what's required in terms of the standard. You need to make sure that you replace them whenever they're due, because otherwise we are not going to be able to have an asset that's performing optimally or efficiently if we don't renew it. Yeah. So that's the key issue that goes to the management. Yes, and I won't deny that, of course, there could be in other parts of the country where skills is an issue as well. Yeah. But on our case, the main issue that we need to be focusing on, we're focusing on, is to say, how do we get to a point where we renew these assets on an ongoing basis as required?
So just so I have you on the record, Johannesburg is not lacking when it comes to expertise.
No.
In the management of water.
No. Johannesburg is not lacking when it comes to expertise of management of water.
Mr. Mayor, I have to conclude with you on this note, though. Yeah. There's been lots that's been said. I'm not sure whether you've finished your 100 days in office yet, but the title of a puppet mayor doesn't sit well with me as a resident of Johannesburg. I'd like to have a mayor that sits in front of me and I have confidence in him. Do you agree with that description, that you are a puppet mayor that is completely out of his depth?
Look, those are opinions. People are entitled to their opinions. The least that they could do, remember the opposition, they used to piggyback on the issue of corruption. In the absence of corruption, they have nothing against me. The only thing that they could do is to attack my personality. So it's their opinion and they're entitled to it. I mean, no liberty to enter into those politics. But I'm an incumbent mayor. I'm voted by council. I'm the mayor that is leading the city of Johannesburg.
Thapelo Ahmad, thank you very much for your time. And Mr. Mkwebo, let me thank you very much for your time. So that's the sum total of the situation in Johannesburg when it comes to water. There are other issues that I would love for you, Mr. Mayor, to come and address in the way that you have done. I think we've at least given the residents some perspective around what's going on.
100%. But just in parting short, the issue that I would like to agree with the MD to a certain degree is that there's also an issue of immigration in our city, in as much as we are saying we have capacity internally. So the amount of immigration that is coming to the city is also creating a burden into the current existing infrastructure. Yeah. The issue of encroachment on people are building on the servitude, people are building on the pipes, on top of the pipes. They do not comply with building laws or building regulations. So those are the issues that we also need to educate our residents to say we need to do away with this, and we need to also control the immigration space. Thank you. As I conclude, thank you.
All right. Immigration is a particular challenge. We will talk about that when you have time, when you have time to come around here. Thank you very much. Those are the officials from the city of Johannesburg, led by the mayor himself, the man on your screen, Thapelo Ahmad.